What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. She is Abby Schnable. I'm Noah Hiles, and Abby, in the world of college sports, there's been one big story, and it's Caleb Love leaving or going back in the. No, I'm just kidding. It's not Caleb. It's the ACC madness that has taken place this week. The quote-unquote Magnificent Seven, if you want to call it that. I would argue it's probably like the Magnificent 3.5, maybe. But regardless, big news in the ACC this week with the spring meetings taking place in Florida. A report by Sports Illustrated said that 7 teams, which is half of the league's full-time members, have met with lawyers together to re-examine the league's media rights? Yeah, broadcast rights, whatever it's called. The media deal that they have. Grant of rights is the term that I was looking for. Re-examining that with lawyers to see if there's essentially a way out of the deal, because no one's very happy with the discrepancy and money that's about to be taking place. So if you're just learning about this, or if you've seen reports on Twitter or social media, or just read about it but still don't understand, I can break it all down real quick. Basically, the way this works is in 2018, the ACC extended its grant of rights media deal with ESPN to go all the way to 2036. That's a huge
Wasn't it
time.
2016 that they renewed it?
I believe their original deal was 2016, and then 2018 they extended it. I could be wrong, but sometime around there, a major extension was reached, and it goes until 2036. Each of the 14 full-time teams, there's 15 teams in the ACC except Notre Dame's independent in football, obviously. Each of those 14 full-time members of the ACC gets anywhere between $35 to $40 million a year from their revenue deal. Now, while that to most people sounds like a really good payout, when the Big Ten's media deal kicks in July, every team in the Big Ten is going to get about $70 million. So that's $30 million more than what teams in the ACC are making. And there will be a similar payout to teams in the SEC when their media deal kicks in next summer. So there have been teams for over the last couple of years in the ACC, especially the big fan base, the high following programs and brands like your Clemsons, your Florida State, that have been looking around and thinking, well, what in the world are we going to do to compete with teams that are $30 million in revenue annually ahead of us? And that's a legitimate concern. However, unlike UCLA and USC, unlike Texas and Oklahoma, there's no real easy way out of the ACC right now, because like those groups of two, both of them leaving their respective conferences, their media deals were about to expire. So they were able to say, hey, we'll be leaving whenever this deal is done. We'll have our grant of rights. And Texas and Oklahoma each paid $50 million to leave a year early, which is, there's an exit clause for every deal like this. However, the ACC, if you want to leave, you have to pay 3 times the annual payout. So that's going to be north of $120 million. And then you don't have your grant of rights media deal until 2036. So that means you cannot make money off of any game you're televised with football until then, which is crazy when you consider how much money that those things bring in. So you're asking to give up, you're asking to pay back 3 years of revenue and go without another 13 years of television revenue, which essentially funds almost half an athletic department when you break it down, because that money goes into their football program, and football and basketball at pretty much any Power 5 school fund the rest of the athletic programs at pretty much any college at the Division 1 through 3 level. Those are the money makers. And even the smaller programs obviously don't, like classifications don't turn a profit sometimes, but I'm talking Division 1. Those are the ones that make your money. The rest of them lose money. So that's how it works, where there's no real easy exit, and it's a big problem. Abby, what do you make of this news of these teams meeting? Were you surprised to hear about it? What was your initial reaction?
I was a little surprised. I think a little bit of everyone was surprised, because it kind of, at least to me, felt like it came a little bit out of nowhere. But I had 2 main thoughts. I mean, So looking at Texas and Oklahoma as is case example, you mentioned they paid $50 million to get out a year early. They had to fight for that. Like, that was not easy for them to do. And like you mentioned, their contract was coming up. So when you look at that case example of those two teams, I find it really difficult to believe that it's going to be anywhere even remotely close to as, and I'm not even going to say it was easy for Texas and Oklahoma, but I don't even think it's going to be even remotely feasible for these 7 teams to kind of step away. And also, where are they going to go is my second thing. Is unfortunately for the ACC is I don't necessarily think that there is a great spot. I don't feel like they have the pull needed to be like, yeah, I'd be a great addition to your team, with exceptions being maybe North Carolina, maybe Duke, but
Duke wasn't even the magnificent
exactly
7. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's just, that's interesting to me because I think out of any of the teams, North Carolina probably has the best case to be like, yeah, I could bring your team
in.
The
whole moving, it's fueled by football revenue. So North Carolina wouldn't even have that much power. Right. And that's the thing. When you look at football brands, only one of these teams could compete in the Big Ten or the SEC, and that's Clemson. And Clemson, as Paul Zeiss wrote in his column early this week, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to make this point real quick. Clemson, over the past, since Trevor Lawrence has left, and even during the back end of his collegiate career, Clemson had the vibe of a team that's just beating up on weak competition rather than, a world beater like they were when they had Deshaun Watson, or like an Alabama. They're not an Alabama. They're not a Georgia. They're on that next tier. They're not even on an Ohio State, Michigan level, I don't think, anymore. They're on that third tier of competitors that you could put like an LSU with or someone like that. But they're not the brand that they think they are if they're claiming that they can go into the SEC and win that league or even the Big Ten. They're not going to be able to do that. And Florida State and Miami, they haven't been relevant in a while. So I don't get what they're barking up right now.
And that's the thing too, is even if they were relevant, that's a hard case to make, to be like, yeah, I'm a team already in this media market, because you think SEC has Florida, SEC has South Carolina. South Carolina and Florida aren't going to want to compete with another school within their market. And I know it's such small potatoes when you look at the grand scheme of realignment and things, but when you look at the NBC when Loyola left, UIC slid right in. But UIC had been trying to get into the Missouri Valley Conference for years, but Loyola didn't want to compete with them. Loyola didn't want to have to share the Chicago media market. And it's a similar thing on a much grander scale for some of these ACC teams wanting to join, maybe the SEC wanting to join. And that's my thing is, I don't know where they go. I don't think there is necessarily anywhere they go. And it's we're entering this. I mean, I know when USC and UCLA announced that they were leaving, the term super conferences started to get thrown around, with the SEC and the Big Ten starting to become these absolute powerhouses that spread kind of, well, for the Big Ten across the country. And it's hard for places like the ACC to compete with that without like jumping ship. But again, what do some of these teams have to be like, yeah, I can add to your conference? Because again, we're not looking at we're not looking at basketball here. If we were looking at basketball, some of these teams would have more of an argument, but it's football revenue.
Well, it's a little bit of every. I mean, it's football revenue as far as the media rights go. And I will say that Florida State, Miami, and Clemson would be good fits for the SEC. I don't think they'd be competitive, but they are big brands. Like, Miami is a brand. Now, Miami doesn't have great attendance, especially when they're not relevant, which they haven't been in years. I mean, the U's back every year in September, but talk to me in October when you're supposed to be playing meaningful football and you're 500 and half your roster is about to enter the transfer portal. That's been the story of Miami more often than not over the last few years. I think Florida State's on its way back. They had a good season last year, but let's see you piece a couple years together. Let's see you win an ACC title. Clemson, like I said before, it's just been beating up on a league that it's not the Big 12. It's not the Big 10. It's not the SEC. The AC, and I get it. Like, Pitt fans don't like hearing me saying that, but You can maybe say it's better than the Big 12. I don't know. But it's not the Big 10 or the SEC. And Clemson would not win those leagues. But I think that there is value in those three brands right there. And they, if the SEC could pretty much just corner the state of Florida, saying we got the Noles, we've got the Gators, and we've got the Hurricanes, that is a worthy addition. But the ACC is not just going to let them go. And you look at other teams, I think North Carolina could be a good fit for the Big Ten because it's a high-level academic thing. And then I think that maybe Virginia could too. But you're looking at Virginia, you're essentially adding another Rutgers for football.
Yeah.
And like what value are you bringing as far as football for that media deal? You're getting a good basketball team. Does Big Ten basketball need another Virginia? I feel like they have three of those, just boring teams that play slow, and every now and then they do okay in the tournament, but more often than not, they get upset. Like, do they need that? A North Carolina basketball brand's great, but are we sure that North Carolina wants to leave without Duke? Because if you look at the other pair moves, USC didn't want to go without UCLA. Texas didn't want to go without Oklahoma.
And
they
Duke
don't want to break up these.
Seven.
Right. And Duke isn't in that Magnificent Seven. So it's like, are we sure that Duke isn't a part of this? Or if they are, like, do you have room for two teams? Does the Big Ten really want to take on those two football brands? There's just a whole bunch of a mess here. And the reality behind all of this, Abby, is that they know they can't go anywhere. The ACC knows they can't go anywhere. And this is all just to light a fire under someone's rear end. That's all this is. This is like a player requesting a trade when they have 11 years left on their contract, or more specifically, 13 years left on their contract. Who's going to take on that contract? Nobody, especially if you can't, make money off of it. And it's just not happening. And so my whole point on this was when UCLA and USC left the Pac-12, or when that announcement thing happened, there was no murmurs of that happening leading up. It just broke. It just said, hey, this is happening.
I remember where and when I remember where I was when it happened. Like, it was a big deal.
Right. And that's the same thing for Texas and Oklahoma. It just, like, the news breaks, and it's not we're considering it. It's not we're meeting with people to look over our options and see if we can get out of it. It's no, we've gone through everything. This is the move that we are making. It's going to happen. It can't happen exactly right now, but we will be leaving. Like, this is your note. It's like telling your landlord, I will not be renewing my lease. I will be going elsewhere. That's what kind of happened with both of those situations. This isn't what this is.
No.
Unless if they're giving them a 13-year notice, which is, very professional of them. You're supposed to give your employer 2 weeks notice if you're quitting. They're giving a 13-year notice, which is nice, but that's about all they can do. Because if you don't think that lawyers have been skimming this deal since it was signed originally and then when it was extended, you're crazy. And if they couldn't find anything then, what makes you think you can find something now? And yeah.
For me, like, you have this Magnificent Seven, and maybe this is the wrong way to look at it, but it kind of makes those schools look a little silly to me. Like, because it's like, again, like you just pointed out, if they couldn't find anything then, what are they going to find now? And it's like, looking at this Magnificent Seven, I think it speaks more about the like, it shows more intelligence and more I don't even know the right word to say about the 7 schools that aren't in this Magnificent
competence.
Yes, competence, because it's like they recognize the situation that they're in, and they're like, look, it's not going to happen. And I think that's why Duke is such a good example, because if anyone was going to leave, I feel like Duke and North Carolina is that package deal, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
And the fact that, let's be real, Duke was likely approached, and Duke said,
not over football though. This whole, you've got to remember that the money that we're talking about, it comes from your football media rights. The basketball stuff, it's
not as big of a deal.
You get your money from basketball from 1 month.
Yeah.
And if you don't play a lot of games that month, you know, the media deal is so much bigger with football, and that's the thing where you can beat. But that's the problem with the ACC is this isn't viewed as a respectable football league. It's just not, and that's not me speculating. I had 4 athletic directors tell me that earlier this month. They said no one views this as a serious football league. That's our big problem. That's what they're trying to focus on as an actual way to fix things. It's, hey, ESPN, we have a media deal with you until 2036. How about you start promoting the teams that you work with rather than promoting the SEC or talking about the Big 12 or the Big 10 or whatever? We are your business partner. You need to make people think that the ACC isn't just a basketball league. And a dying basketball league at that, because they don't get respect in basketball anymore either. But that's the thing where when you really have 2 programs that are better known for football over basketball that have a seat at the major table as far as brand recognition, and that's Florida State and that's Clemson. You could argue Miami has a better football brand, but their basketball program is leaps and bounds ahead of where the football program is right now. And I think that people are starting to recognize that. You could point out to other teams. I would say Pitt's a football school more than a basketball school, but Pitt doesn't have that brand recognition of a Florida State or a Miami. They're not filling up 80,000 people on a Saturday afternoon. So when you have teams like NC State and Virginia tagging along in this, I mean, come on. What are we doing here? Who wants to add those on for football revenue? If it's overall addition, sure. But if this is at the forefront led by how much your football brand is worth, 2 of these teams are relevant. Maybe 3 if you want to believe that Miami's a big football brand. I don't think it's as big as a lot of people really understand it to be. You got nothing.
You mentioned this in your story, and so maybe this is the route that they need to go, and maybe this is the route they're trying to go, and we're just hearing the rumblings, is some of these teams, maybe it is trying to figure out a way to make the more successful teams get more money. Maybe that is the only solution, but then what is the point of that Magnificent Seven? Because some of those teams aren't getting that extra cut. Was it the Miami AD that said that when you were talking to them?
No, so the idea behind the revenue sharing, the Magnificent Seven was 7 athletic directors who felt that they just had enough of the ACC and they all met together. I don't think it really it's a status separation because, like I said, Pitt's a more valuable athletic department than NC State. Yeah. It just is. And there are other brands that probably should have been included in that throughout the league. But Miami in the revenue distribution, all of that goes back to they want, instead of every team getting a $40 million cut, it'd be $20 million to everyone. And then the rest of that $20 million that would go equally, you would divide it based on success. So if your team wins the ACC, you would get $80 million as opposed to 40. And if your team comes in last in the ACC, you would just get 20. And there's pros and cons to that. But if you're a team like Wake Forest, or if you're a team like Boston College, why the hell would you ever agree to that? Yeah. Because it's thinking, okay, well, our only hope of becoming a Clemson, of becoming a Florida State, or even a program like Pitt, where, we don't have the huge following, but we can build through stability and a good coaching staff and recruiting and all that kind of stuff and build into a competitive program where we can be a top tier threat in this league every year. That's never going to happen if we are at a $40 million difference with teams in our own league, let alone 70 to 80 outside the league. So why would Boston College and Wake Forest and Syracuse and other schools like that ever agree to something like that? There's no way. Heather Lyke even told me, she said, the number that people could come to an agreement if there was unequal revenue share, it would be so insignificant, it would never satisfy the money-hungry programs like a Florida State. It might get you $10 million more, but in the grand scheme of things, that's still nowhere close to what the SEC and the Big 12 or Big 10 teams are making. So you're still going to be dissatisfied. So this was just a desperate ploy for attention to try to light a fire under someone's butt, to try to figure out a way to make the most of what they have going for them. That's all this is. They can't go anywhere.
Money hungry. It's these programs that want to say, oh, we're trying to compete with Big 10 and SEC. And we can't do that when our revenue deal is like this. But it really just comes down to what you said, money hungry.
Well,
And
you
that's what we're
need
looking at.
money. You need money to compete.
Absolutely.
Like if I'm Clemson or Florida State, and I look at that expanded college football playoff format, and even Pitt, those are programs that Pitt, if that playoff was expanded 2 years ago, Pitt would have been in the playoff. Florida State and Clemson would have been playoff teams or close to it last year. And those are two teams, again, Florida State and Clemson, and maybe even Pitt again, that have a shot where if it was a 12-field team this upcoming season, they would be competing for that. And when you look around and think, wow, we're going to enter this playoff field, and every team that we're going to be playing, because it's going to be filled with Big Ten and SEC teams, and they're going to think, well, we're going up against teams in these playoffs that have $30 million more to recruit with, that have $30 million more to build better facilities, to hire extra coaching, to throw around, and hopefully it will result in an NIL opportunity or two. It is a disadvantage, but crying and trying to get out of a deal that you all agreed to isn't the way to go about it. And the worst part, as we wrap this all up, Abby, the worst part about all this that not many people are talking about, when the SEC and the Big Ten's new media deals that haven't even started yet, you want to know when they expire? 2030. So this is going to be another thing where not only are they going to have this huge advantage or disadvantage, they're going to get to renegotiate 6 years before the ACC does.
Yep.
So it's only going to get worse. And so I get the frustration. I get the panic. This is nothing more than an empty threat. And it's an embarrassing look on a lot of them. I feel, and it's embarrassing for the big programs who led the charge when they know darn well nothing's going to happen from this, and they just look desperate and kind of stupid. And it's an even more embarrassing thing for like programs like NC State, who it's like, you can't even win in this league. What makes you think you can? Why are you worried about competing against the SEC and the Big Ten when you can't even freaking beat Boston College when your season's on the line or something like that? Like, come on, let's get real here.
The world we live in.
It's certainly interesting. It's a long-term problem that I don't see a solution to. Maybe there will be one. Maybe we're all wrong. Maybe the ACC does blow up by next year, and Pitt's playing in the Big 12. Who knows? It's impossible to predict. But based off of everything that I'm as someone who's spoken to multiple athletic directors, commissioners, all types of sources on this subject, I don't see a way this gets resolved anytime soon. Finley's ready to wrap it up. I think I am too. Any final shot or any final thoughts, Abby?
I think we hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, I agree. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and keep tuning into the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel for all of your Pittsburgh sports analysis. Take care.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.